Welcome to Podnutz, episode 12. This episode is called Colleen Talks Linux, some Windows, and a little bit of Mac. We have a great guest lined up today. It's Colleen from TWIT.tv and TWITlive.tv. She's definitely a fan favorite over at TWIT and is considered the geek of all trades. We're really happy to have her here on the podcast today. We're going to be talking with her about Linux and a bunch of other stuff. Now, if you don't know Colleen, you can check out her website at thedigitalkitty.com or follow her on Twitter at twitter.com/digitalkitty. Okay, let's get right into the podcast, shall we? How's it going, Colleen?
It's going very well. How about you?
It's going good. Thanks for being with us today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Now, I wanted to ask you about Linux because anybody who has watched TWITlive.tv lately knows that that's something that you're into.
Yeah, Linux is definitely one of the things that I play around with. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. I love it, but sometimes it's a very abusive relationship.
So I guess Linux isn't your operating system of choice?
My operating system of choice is a very complicated question.
Okay.
My favorite operating system is BOS, if you remember that from back in the day. They went out of business. They sold their intellectual property to Palm, who split off into Palm Source and Palm One, and then I guess Palm One turned into someone else. And I don't even know who owns the intellectual property these days, but there's an open source project called Haiku looking at kind of building it up from scratch again. So while that's my favorite operating system from a geeky technical perspective, I don't use it anymore. And I'm hoping that at one point I'll be able to and that there's applications for it. But it's not.
Do you not use it because there's no applications for it, or
there are applications? It's mainly the drivers.
Okay.
So I do use Linux. I carry around a 4 gigabyte and a 512 tiny USB drive with me wherever I go, and I have Pendrive Linux installed on them, so I can pop onto any system and use them. And then I use Linux on my, I use Maemo Linux 2008 on my Nokia N800, and I have Ubuntu booting on most of my computers as an option. On my gaming computer, I don't have it on there because there's no point.
Right.
It's just easier to use Windows.
Right.
And on let's see, I have on one of my laptops right now, I have Ubuntu OS 10 and Windows XP running, and that's all on a ThinkPad, so that's a lot of fun.
Now, do you use virtual machines like the way Macs run Parallels, or do you boot straight into Linux, or how do you go about your boot configurations? Well,
I really like operating systems, so for the most part, I boot into one or the other, though I run virtual machines, so if I'm in my Windows installation, I can pull up a virtual machine of my Linux install, or I can pull up a virtual machine of my Linux install I can pull them up wherever I am to make it simple. I haven't set up Parallels or any virtual machine in the Apple install yet because I'm not that far with it. I'm still trying to get all the kinks worked out. And but I think that one of the best options for me is actually going to be using Parallels within OS 10. I think that's going to provide the most fluid experience.
Yeah, that's what I use, and I think I'm almost like the opposite of you because I'm all over Apple, and then I use like Parallels for running Windows XP, and then I've barely touched Linux. I mean, I run Ubuntu a little bit just to see what it's all about, but that Pendrive is Pendrive Linux a distribution, or is that just
Pendrive Linux is a distribution that is deceptively named.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different Linuxes that can run off of pen drives, and most of them you can set to run persistent, which means that if you make a change, the next time you boot up, it's there, unlike a live CD, which disappears.
Right.
But there's actually a distribution called Pendrive Linux, and I like it because it's really small. It's under 512 megs. But at the same time, it still has a full OpenGL interface. So you get all the window effects and the really nice user environment. And it uses GNOME, which I prefer over KDE.
Okay, now what's the difference between GNOME and KDE? What's that?
Well, Linux as an operating system isn't what most general users imagine an operating system to be. My mother, my father, anyone I know imagines that you turn on the computer and the operating system is the piece of software that you work within to launch the programs by clicking here, pressing enter, whatever.
Right.
Linux is a much broader term than that. They're really thinking of the GUI, the thing that they see and feel and interact with. Linux is actually this magical little piece of software that basically turns code and commands and organizes everything and takes all of that information and translates it into machine language and interacts with the hardware of the computer, which is a level of which even most computer programmers don't entirely understand how that works. So Linus Torvalds, the history of it is that he wanted to learn more about how a computer worked, and he figured the best way was to write an operating system, a piece of software to talk to the hardware.
Okay.
So Linux does not have a standard interface, a graphical user interface. There are many different versions, many different shells, GUIs, whatever you want to call them, that allow the person to interact with the Linux operating system, which is just a text-based thing as far as the interface goes to begin with.
Okay, so you're starting with text and then you just build on top of that?
Exactly. And so if you were to install most Linux is really just it's an operating system, and the way you would interact with it is you have a black screen and a white blinking cursor, and you type something in and you hit enter and it does it if you know the right command. But that's really not very user friendly. There's various different pieces of software that allow you to click and navigate and see things, and those are GUIs. The two most popular are GNOME, G-N-O-M-E, and or it might be GNOME, I don't know, I call it GNOME,
right,
and KDE.
And they're both graphical user interfaces.
Exactly. Okay. And there's also smaller ones like Fluxbox and Enlightenment and all sorts of stuff. Xwindows, Xorg. No, Xorg is a driver. Xface, XFCE, I think is what it is. Okay. I could be wrong.
It's all right.
There's a lot of acronyms in this community.
Okay, so I know that there's the graphical user interface, and then isn't there other interfaces where like there's a lot of typing, like command line interfaces?
Exactly. Now, you can boot up Linux, any form of Linux, Ubuntu, whatever. You can boot it up without the GUI, or you can get a purely command line, which is just the typing interface that we were talking about, type interface. Or you can pull up a command line as a window within the graphical user interface.
Okay.
So one reason that really geeky computer people love Linux a lot of times is the power that gives them. They can work in a graphical environment, but if they know the command, they can just type it in, hit enter, and it does it really precisely, and they can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And so what a lot of really hardcore Linux users will tell you whenever you knock the command line is it's a powerful tool, blah, 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 which I personally